Good evening, and welcome to this Facebook Live with myself, Ruth. And tonight we have a very special guest. So thank you for joining us. If you're watching live, give us a thumbs up. If you are watching on the replay, if you have any questions, we're talking about giving your child the gift of challenge. So without further ado, let me invite John. Welcome to Facebook. How are you doing?
Excellent, Ruth. Hope everything's going great tonight. Thank you for having me this evening.
Thank you for joining us. I know that you had a very busy schedule and you just finished your last session, so we made it. So this giving your child the gift of challenge is always a very popular topic. Maybe we should start just, John, if you could just give us a little bit of background on yourself, who you are and what do you do?
Great. So I'm from Boston in the United States, and I've been working in international schools now for quite some time. I worked in Boston Public Schools in Mexico, and I've also worked locally in Hong Kong. I worked at ISF. I was a master teacher at ISF. And Victoria Shanghai Academy, I was a head of learning enhancement for the secondary school. And last, I was in Spain. I was a director of K-12 student support. So looking over with the EAL, the learning support, and the counselors, ensuring they're all working together from K-12. I have a master's in education. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. So I work a lot with ABA, and finally I have licensure in special education, English language learners, and multiple other things. Recently, I've opened up a relatively new business because working in Hong Kong, I wanted to ensure that students were getting the correct support they needed, executive functioning support, not just the academic support, well-rounded. So what I do now is I work with many different students in executive functioning skills, working and making sure that they have the skills they need to succeed, not only in school, but later on in their career and in their life. So that's what I've been doing recently, and it's excellent to hook up with you, Whitney.
It's interesting, and there's just such a need for it, as you and I have been discussing. So if you have a child in school, if you believe that your child may need some extra support or is having some extra support for something, we are focusing tonight's discussion on stretch and challenge, but equally, John, I'm sure we're going to delve into the other side, some support for, be it catching up or simply if we, COVID, obviously, this is the aftermath of COVID, so we're seeing a lot of that. So if you have a child, if you have any questions about support in school, John's your man. So, and type your comments. I think I'll be able to see them. So, John, you just mentioned it might be worth unpacking a little bit. We have to be careful about some of the jargon. Executive functioning skills. So we talk about this a lot. Could you explain what does that actually mean?
Exactly. So the IB does a little bit with the approaches to learning, your thinking, communication, social skills, and self-management. How executive functioning skills, let me put it this way. When you are going for a job later in life, they don't ask you, how is your long division in cursive going? They go a different way. They want to know, how are you flexible? Are you organized? Do you have task initiation, metacognition, stress tolerance? And these are all the different areas of executive functioning that we check with different children. Now, our brains develop in different speeds, and this is something that all children are trying to gain over time. So there's different executive functioning skills. As I said, responsive vision, emotional control is one, sustained attention, organization, flexibility, task initiation, stress tolerance. So there's multiple different ones that in schools, besides the academics, we're teaching these so they can stretch them a little bit further in life, and helps them with the academics later on.
Do you think schools are teaching this?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel that the IB does try to teach that with their ATL skills.
What's ATL? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Approaches to learning. To learning, and that's driven into the IB and the MYP and the PYP. Thinking, communication, social, self-management. I think research skills. So what they do is they do try to teach that. However, many children, as we talked a little bit, twice exceptional children
Mm,
that are gifted, but they have another area that they lack with, or many different children don't need a little bit more work in those areas. So do they teach? I think there's a general teaching of them, but that focused teaching doesn't always happen. And that is, it does, I think schools do try, but that goes back to something called universal design of learning, which we can talk a little bit later about.
mhm. I'm writing notes. There's a lot of technical
I'm
terms
sorry
here.
about that. Apologies.
That's okay. No, that's perfectly okay. Is super, super interesting. Support in schools, and we were talking about, or you mentioned twice exceptional. So maybe now is the right time to sort of go into that a little bit. Again, I'm going to ask you to do lots of definitions, I fear. But it's interesting and it's good for parents to know. So in a nutshell, what is twice exceptional?
So when you have a sort of a child that is gifted in one of the many different ways, maybe they have above average ability or creativity or task commitment. Sometimes it goes with something else. And maybe that's ADHD, autism, social skills that they need a little bit support on. And maybe they have an above average ability, but what's happening is their grades are not matching that. And that's when we need a little bit of work inside of the schools. So one of the questions is ensuring that the schools are reaching all those students. Is there differentiation happening in that school? And that's one thing I'm sure you do in top schools, Ruth, is ensure that you look around the schools and ensure that there's differentiation happening amongst them.
Oh, have I frozen? Yeah, no, I visited 8 schools in the last 7 days. I'm pretty exhausted, but it's so interesting. That's another topic for another day, school tours, because everything that we're discussing here, whether or not we can actually find out if a school is doing it, that's another story. But these are all the right questions to be asking, at least. The answers may or may not be satisfactory.
Yeah. So one thing I've found is there an enrichment and differentiation coordinator in the school? Because that's really important. Is there someone in the school that's taking care of enrichment and differentiation? And that doesn't mean, I'm going to dive into this universal design of learning a little bit, because that doesn't mean that if a child is gifted that they get pulled out. Because when you're working at students, you got to make sure that the teacher has to make sure they're not aiming just at the middle and everyone has the exact same worksheet. And you see in your school tours, if I saw that, that might be a red flag to me. That universal design learning is something that the schools have to really commit to know that they're doing that. And there's 3 things in universal design learning: multiple ways to engage, that the students have choices and they're moving around. That if you see in the classroom, they're engaged in different ways. And that's something you might want to do. You do in school tours, and parents might want to do. If the students have multiple means the teachers are showing them multiple ways to represent the material. Is there audio, video, hands-on? So you're hitting all those different learners. You're hitting the ones that may be a little bit challenging so they can have that social skills in class. And finally, is there multiple ways for the students to show what they know? Is it all just in the written assessment? Can they do a song, a video, or different ways? So yeah, I'm sure you see that when you go to different schools. And that's something that I always look for. Is the school engaged in that universal design learning? Or what step are they on the way? And if they don't know what universal design learning, is scary.
To be honest, I don't think I'm seeing a great deal of that. So maybe you can help me. Obviously, universal design of learning is one term. What would schools call it if they don't call it that? I mean, I've heard them talk about differentiation, but it's interesting. Like I say, I've been to 8 schools in 7 days. I haven't seen a lot of choice. The children are all doing one thing at one time, as far as I can tell.
So there's a couple. That is a little bit frustrating. Another word is you'll hear thrown up. Another jargon people might want to ask for is MTSS, multiple tier support system. That you're reaching the different levels of learners, and the teachers are scaffolding to different levels, and we're stretching. Now, that
Mm,
doesn't mean always looking at the lowest learner. Is there a group out there for the highest, most able worker as well? And we're hitting that. So, and I'm looking around and thinking about different schools that I've seen. Unless the school, and I think that's a question I would ask as a parent going to school, how do you differentiate? And what does it look like
mm,
in your school? And if it's not there, it'd be a little bit tricky to ensure the gifted learners or any of the learners are getting accessing.
mm. Do you think that IB would allows for that a little bit more easier than some other prescribed curricula?
That's a great question. I think the IB definitely allows for it. The NYP certainly, and the PYP. And I think that everyone should be doing that in the class. The doesn't matter if prescribed or not prescribed, right? But
Mm,
the IB does have that little bit more freeway and to do that. So that is allowed, I feel.
yeah. All right. So you've hit us with quite a bit of jargon
Oh,
already. So no, it's great. It's great. Um, Multiple tier support system. How is that different to, so that's differentiation. That's just another way of saying differentiation, right?
more or less, more or
So
less.
so so for myself, okay, obviously I'm not a qualified educator. So to my untrained eye, although I've, visited hundreds and hundreds of
I
schools,
bet.
like I said, my pet peeve is, first of all, when you actually can't go into the classroom. That is my absolute pet peeve. So certainly out of the 8 schools I visited, I think at least 3 of them would not even let us into the classroom, which is quite unfortunate. But when you are looking in the classroom, what do you look for to say, okay, yes, they're doing differentiated learning. Yes, they're implementing multiple tiers of support.
So that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things that you need to look for. Look in the classroom and not just see if everyone's quiet and working on the same sheet of paper. That would be a little, as I said a little bit before, that's not that great. If their students are in small groups and teachers are working in small groups with students, that is a good news right there. If the students are working on different things, some are audio, some are visual, and they're moving around, I think that's another great way of doing it. If the teacher is not at the front of the class
Yeah.
and lecturing, because there's many different ways to learn. As I said a little bit, it doesn't have to be, I was just working with a student today and I was saying, what kind of learner do you learn by hearing, or do you learn by touching and touching and by playing and seeing? He goes, play that. I don't do that good by hearing. So if the
Mm,
teacher's moving around and people are learning by different ways, that would be a good way.
mm.
Yeah. And if there's a differentiation coordinator in that school, and finally, what does the learning support team look like? Is there multiple teachers in the classroom besides just one?
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about stretch and challenge. So if I look around a classroom and they are unfortunately all kind of doing the same thing, and there's usually 1 or 2 kids that are completely zoned out, right? They're not engaged. I mean, what are maybe they're not just bored, maybe there are other reasons. What are the reasons why children are maybe not engaging in class? And if
That is
yeah.
a great question. And I know you have kids and you probably have seen it a lot. There's so many reasons. And there's so many ways to look at it. So what is this? They're not thriving in school, for example.
Mm,
Maybe one way you can see it is they come home and they say, listen, I'm not bored. They're not paying attention. They're refusing to write.
mm,
Maybe one thing you can see is they have very poor social skills. They're not having many friends. They're not following the rubrics well. They're doing a lot of writing, and then they're doing a lot of writing, but they're not following the rubrics.
mm. Which would show up if the writing is graded, which unfortunately in a lot of schools it's not even graded. Right?
Yeah. One thing that I really think is really important in many schools is they do these, what we call, I'm going to use a couple, two or three jargon words, and I'll explain them right now, is universal screeners. And universal screeners are the tests that you see at the beginning and end of the year. Those are your MAP testing, and you know the MAP testing. Some people use STAR testing, whatever the school uses. Now, those tests are great because you'll see the beginning and the end of your progress. Now, one thing that I always think about is, What if my child's excellent and has 99% and doing excellent, but is not getting in IBs, getting threes or C's or D's, whatever form you're doing? What do we do here? And that's always a little bit of that's another topic we can talk about a little bit further down the road. But those universal screeners that we have in the beginning and end of the year are extremely important. So you got to make sure your school has those, and they're using those as well.
Right. I know a lot of schools do MAP tests. I mean, the US schools tend to use MAP, and some of the other schools use the Cambridge, the Primary Insight, or the Yellis, or you're chuckling away. But you're right. So parents need to sort of ask the teachers to explain what this means, align these scores with the school reports, make sure that it all looks like it makes sense. The trouble is, of course, parents often don't know what they're looking at, and the teachers and the schools don't really take the time to explain it, unfortunately. Maybe we need to develop some sort of little interpretation guide for those standardized tests. You call them universal screeners.
You're right. That's a great idea, because they tell so much. And then what the thing is, are the teachers using it? And then the other part is, are they matching the grades that your child is getting? Is your child overachieving or underachieving? It's really important. And this going back to the twice exceptional thing that we talked about earlier, if there's as I said, if they're getting 99% and they're not doing great, there's a problem there that needs to be addressed.
You mean if they're getting 99 percentile on the MAP test, and then in school they're not making friends, or there's comments? Let's talk a little bit about school reports, so like decoding. Like, what are the comments on school reports that maybe parents, that they're kind of a little bit coded, aren't they? That a lot of parents might miss some of those key phrases that would indicate that your child isn't thriving in school.
Sometimes is what's that? Yeah, working
towards.
Yeah. Sometimes pay attention, and sometimes is completes their homework assignments. Then we have a little bit of a problem. But I think school communication with a teacher should happen a lot. As a teacher before, I would always impressed and wanted to be communicated. I wanted that communication from the parent, and seeing what the next step is, and from the student as well. You want the student to come up and say, listen, I'm not doing that great. What can I do better? And that's going back to those executive functioning skills I talked about a little bit earlier, about advocacy, teaching your child to advocate a little bit for themselves.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And one thing I did see this week, which I always look for, is the way that the furniture is arranged in the classroom. And one of the parents that I was with actually asked the teacher, whether this was by design. It wasn't actually. It was just an accident of the size and shape of the room. But it's always worth asking. When we see such different furniture formation in schools, that it's worth asking the teacher, does the teacher have a level of awareness, or is it by design, and what's the thinking behind that?
Right. Our autonomy to do that as well, and that's a big area too. And I think that actually, you have an excellent point, Ruth. You're such a good. I mean, you're an expert in schools. You have such a great eye. You've been hundreds. You have such a great eye. But that is one that you really just nailed. You put the hammer on the nail right there. Is looking at the setup of the classroom is really important as well.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, because I know you used to work in schools, and now you obviously saw a need, and you're very busy, which is both is good for you, but maybe unfortunate for those parents, that because their children aren't getting the support that they need in school. So what can you do, and how do you work with parents to support these children to develop their skills?
There's a couple things that I work with, and I'm going to step back a little bit. And once a parent contacts me, sometimes I go to an educational psychologist first. And I'm gonna go off a little tangent right here, if you don't mind, Ruth. Is I feel that for most parents, it's very important, because Hong Kong doesn't have a licensure for educational psychologists.
Yeah.
Therefore, anyone can kind of hold up their window and do that. And that's really scary for me. As worked as director of Learn Sport over in Spain, and then here, and then you get some reports that just, you might miss that 2E thing. You might miss that, and it could be written down as ADHD, And that's really, really scary. So it's very important that when a parent's looking for educational psychologists, they see, okay, if it's in the US, was it an APA, American Psychological Association? Are they accredited? Was it an online program? Really, I'm really asking for parents, make sure you do your research on these and the educational psychologists you see.
100%. Yeah, and ask you or ask me. We've got a few referrals for people who are proven and ethical and all the rest of it.
I think asking both of us, either of us, even sending me a quick email, John, is this person someone that you do? Because I've seen so many reports, and I can say, I've never heard of this one, or I know what the IB takes. The IB is very specific in what they take for getting the accommodations. So if you go that route, there's that route. So sorry, back to that. So a lot of students I have may or may not have an educational psychologist report. And then what happens next at the school, and this is something that you might want to check out, is does the school write an IEP, a 504 plan, a learning summary, or something like that? Now, here's something, Ruth, that's kind of interesting. I feel that gifted students should get those as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do they not? They do.
No, not always. So
well, let's back up a little bit, John, if you don't mind. I do feel there's an awful lot of lingo and jargon here. So educational psychologists, if parents feel that their children are either bored and they are gifted, or they need some support, do they need to, should they not see an educational psychologist? What's the thought process there?
Okay, that's a great part. I have my personal opinion. Two things. A, why would you not want a 20-page report about your child and how they learn? I think that would be great. I mean, as someone from an objective source to say, listen, this is where my child is at, and this is what I want to know. And then you can nail, if maybe they need to be stretched, maybe they're nailing executive functioning issues they want to work on. I think it's a great investment, personally. And from there, right? Is that what your thought as well?
Oh, 100%. But of course, parents are perhaps afraid of what they might find. And there's one of my parents talked about it as a Streisand effect today. It's not the Streisand effect, but what's the phenomenon when, if you go looking for something, if you're going to pay the big bucks to somebody to find out if your child has something, you're going to find what you're looking for. Do you know what I'm? There must be a word for this sort of.
So there's two things. I don't know the exact word, but that's why you have to go to professional educational psychology.
Yeah, of course.
And then why not? You don't have to give that report to the school. That's your property. That doesn't automatically go.
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to get admitted to a new school, you kind of do.
Yeah, okay.
Because you have to tick a box to say, has your child ever seen an educational psychologist? And if yes, then they want to see the report. So that is a big dilemma. And I think I've covered this before. We've had Dr. Andrew Adler on the stream before. So it is a bit of a dilemma. But if you're not looking, if parents are not looking for a new school, they're happy in the school that they're in, or they think that they would be with a little bit more support, then absolutely, why not go ahead and get the report done? Because like you say, it's so much information. I did it for my own child.
Right. There's a couple of things that I have to say, there's a couple of things. Let's say, first of all, that you get a report done and you get and maybe it's a younger years, you're doing early intervention, you find out why, and then maybe it's maybe you find out that he has some reading intervention needs, and you're able to really nail that in second and third grade. And by grade 5, that's wiped out. You've really, really gotten that, nailed it. And that means they're going to be clean and clear, and they've gotten all that early intervention needs, and that's done with. But another thing that people need to think about a little bit later is accommodations. Accommodations are not a bad thing at all.
Right. Before we get to accommodations, so we talked about whether or not we need to get the psychologist's report. And accommodations probably come in line with, you talked about IEP earlier. So you get the report done, and then you have this 25-page plus report from a licensed, well, maybe not licensed, but a professional educational psychologist who's met your child several times, done all the tests, and can say, this is how your child learns. This is their strengths. These are their weaknesses. Do this and do this, that, and the other. And then there's a set of recommendations on the end of the report. and then that then gets translated into an IEP and accommodations. Could you take it from there?
Oh, this is a wonderful area that I'd like to talk. It's very important that the school, once you put it in, and even those gifted, I think as many children as possible should have individual education plans. And a smaller school, or not all of them, but that's just a dream, and that's me thinking about, mystically. But what happens then is they summarize what is on the report, and what happens after that is the parents then get accommodations. Now, what should happen is the school should work with the parents on creating that plan. It should not be created by the school and given to the parents. It should be worked
Mhm.
out with the child. It should be worked out with the parent. The goals should be worked out together.
Yeah.
There should be present academic performance. There should be, struggles, achievements. What are the goals are extremely important. All of these
Mm.
things should be written out on there.
Mhm.
And after that, you see what accommodations are provided. Maybe the accommodation that the school recommends, is a scribe. And maybe the school doesn't want to provide a scribe. So maybe as a parent, you have to advocate for that, saying, you know what, my child was on here as a scribe. I have the IB access and inclusion policy. I want my child to have a scribe in my normal way of working. And
Mm.
I think you have to push back. And maybe sometimes that's when you need a special education advocate to help push
I
for
was
these
going to
things.
say, is that something that you do? Is that part of what you do?
Yeah, I try working as IEPs because I have the IB access and inclusion policy. If you pass me the IEP or before that, I can say these are the ones that they qualify for. Let's make sure that they have that. But the child has to be on board too, right?
Yeah.
So if all of a sudden they qualify for 50% extra time, the school isn't giving that, or they're giving 25% extra time, well, let's work on getting that 50% in there.
Yeah, interesting. I'm more familiar with accommodations for students that need like a little bit of extra support, but what sort of accommodations are common for gifted children?
Oh, at the twice exceptional, that's a little bit different, and it depends. If you have gifted, well, there's a couple different ones. Maybe if you're looking at the twice exceptional, maybe they need to sit in front of the class. And that's just a very simple one. Maybe they need check-ins. Maybe they do need to work with a learning support teacher to work on flexibility. Perfectionism is a big one that we need to work a lot on. So
Mm.
maybe they have to work with a counselor on social issues. So with that twice exceptional, there's a lot there that you might need to kind of work on and ensure that with that giftedness, there's support with it, and ensuring that, again, maybe if they're gifted and talented, they're getting, if they can't be solved in class, they are getting pulled out and doing passion projects or something that really is pushing their learning a little bit.
Mm. What schools do you know in Hong Kong that have, I'm not familiar, not too many, that have really good, strong, gifted and talented programs?
To be honest, I've worked. It's a loaded question.
Mm.
I'm not. I'm not 100% sure that there's one. I just worked in Benjamin Franklin International School in Spain. We had a gifted and talented enrichment coordinator,
Mhm.
and we pushed for universal design of learning, and that was in what we did. I didn't see that as much so with that in some schools in Hong Kong. So it's something that I think is an area that should be developed a little bit more, so parents don't have to go outside and get the support that
Yeah,
their
for
students may
sure.
need.
For sure. It's really disappointing in a way. It is so disappointing and it is so inflexible and, for the amount that the parents pay, yeah. I'm interested in this advocacy thing because I've done some of it.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
parents in Hong Kong, some parents in Hong Kong are quite afraid to what they might see as a bit of a challenge to the school. They're a bit afraid of asking for more. Um, what they
Okay.
they should they should not need to be afraid, right? They're
Oh, push for that. Push. I mean, I'm from the United States, so it's a little bit different. It is we have many, many different laws there that back up the IEP is a signed written contract, meaning if the school doesn't follow it, there's some problems. Push. if you need the IB access and inclusion policy, look for that. If you're an IB school, find it online. Let's see
Yeah.
what lines up with it. And
Yeah.
if you don't know, talk to somebody, talk to myself, yourself, and say, this is a report. Talk to the educational psychologist and push for those ones.
I mean, I'm a bit like that, you know. You need to be a little bit of a detective. Not only the IB inclusion policy, but a lot of the schools have accreditations from whether that's a US organization or a UK organization, and there's stuff written deep somewhere on page 159, section 7 point whatever. But again, parents would be some parents would be reluctant to bring that to the schools. Your work in the US, John, was that with public schools or private schools? Both.
It was with public schools. No, public schools in the US. So that was very much straightened by law. Yeah.
So I think there is a difference here. Obviously, the parents feel that the Hong Kong schools, some of them are highly selective. Everybody just wants an easy life, really, don't they? But advocacy. Let's so tips and tricks, if you like. Ask.
Okay. Especially the first thing that you should do is make sure that if you have one you get an educational psychologist report. It's imperative that within the first 60 days, I think really by the end of October, that IEP is done. And they are not just handing it to you, they're working with it. The child is involved up to grade 4. I mean, even going down to grade 3, the child's involved, the parents involved. Everyone knows about this, and everyone knows about, and you're working together as a team to push your child forward. That is the goal of an IEP, period.
Yeah.
So that it's not, and so the advocacy part is then looking and saying, and parents getting a report, and then someone writing a little bit later, not doing it, not following through, and seeing, okay, my child should be getting services 3 days a week, and they're not getting any. We should write this down on there. Services a couple days a week. So maybe they should be getting Orton Gillingham. That is for dyslexia. And how are we following through with that? And how is the school following through with that dyslexia diagnosis? How is the school following through with the autism ASD diagnosis? Are they letting it go, or is there social support? And how many days a week is that? What does it look like? And let's hold all of each other accountable.
I think that I've got 2 words in the front of my mind. I'm just going to say them. Counselling out. So when a child presents with some needs, they have a psychologist's report, they have some recommendations, you're going up to the school, you're asking for this, you're asking for that, you're asking for the other. Probably most of the other parents aren't, but you are. And if the school feels that that's going to be a problem, or they don't have the sort of support that you're asking for, there is, in some schools, a little bit of a culture of, well, maybe we're not the school for you. I mean, you've come across that, right?
Yeah. So if there's a school, you should ask. That's something that we have. If a school is not inclusive, the IB is inclusive. The school should be inclusive too. There should be no numbers cutting a child off and preventing them from getting into the DP. That's my feeling on that. There should be no numbers.
Again, please?
There should be no numbers cutting a child from going off into IB-DP program. We should be inclusive in letting them in. We should counsel them the right way. And different schools have different pathways. There's a careers path, and there's different pathways. Everyone wants to go the right way and what's for the child. But a school should, I think there should be no fear in that. Once your child's accepted to a school, the school should do. The school has a responsibility to do what's right for the child. And straight through. That's my theory on that. We have to be an inclusive school, and we have to have all the support for all the children that we have.
Yeah. I mean, I am encouraged to see the CP, the careers program. Is it the careers program, certificate program of IB, gaining more traction in some of the schools, alternate pathways. But we still see, I mean, there was a discussion on the Facebook group this week where people always ask for which of the schools are inclusive, and the schools that are named are there's 3 or 4 names that we always hear.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is the IB is inclusive in nature. Therefore, if the school is IB, yeah, interesting, very interesting.
That's my feeling on it, and we
Yeah.
should, as a school, we have an ethical duty to put the students through there. And if we're cutting them off, we shouldn't get me in trouble. I don't care. We shouldn't be number chasing. We shouldn't be looking. We should be our commitment should be to our school's commitment should be to the children. So that's my theory. We should let them all try. But yeah, there's different. That's a question I have for you, actually, Ruth. Different pathways in different schools. What have you found? I know there's a CP. Many schools offer a diploma program, American diploma, or
yeah, there's a little bit of, this is only really in the last 5 years. So there's a number of, again, more sort of US focused schools, but not only, there's a few schools just offering their own high school diploma. Because of course children don't have, and then maybe that would be that they would take a few of the IB courses, but then they graduate with their own school diploma. We've got the BTEC.
Yeah.
Again, combined with maybe some IB courses. Yeah, but not a great deal of choice. Most of the IB schools will want their children to do the full IB diploma and excel in it. And we know the schools that are, and here's the thing, I mean, I've said it a million times, but there's a reason that there often is a story behind a school that has the most excellent IB diploma scores year after year after year after year. They're engineered. I mean, and the counselling out can start in what, grade 6, 7, and then upwards from there.
Yeah, and it's tricky. This goes back a little bit to what I first talked about and the executive functioning skills. So I'm actually want to tie this around, because if a student has the correct executive functioning skills, they can be successful in the IBDP. If they're able to really have organizational skills, if they're able to have all those skills, and the parents, one thing that I really recommend parents to do is look online for self-assessments and self-assess yourself as a parent, and ensure that you have those executive functioning skills.
Are they reliable? Is there a reliable self-assessment that you can recommend? Seems quite a lot of
there's a couple you can send me. I have a couple that I used.
Okay.
What is their name? Peg Dawson at Smart But Scattered. I think they have one online that you can use. That's pretty good. But I recommend the parents to do it and the children to do it as well. And get that as self-assessment, so you can say, okay, I don't want to have these problems a little bit later. What are the skills that my child needs? And this goes back to what I do. What are the skills that my child needs to develop? Is it time management skills? Because you don't want them to miss out on school if time management and organization are the only things that we can set them back. Let's work on those early and intervene on that. So one thing I think about, going back a little bit, and I'm off topic, I'm sorry, is tutoring. I'm not a fan of tutoring. I'm going to tell you why. Tutoring is a band-aid. I found it a band-aid. You can put a math tutor on for somebody, but if the child is really focusing from time management issues, that's not going to solve the problem a little bit later down. So I think that is one thing that we do as executive functioning and academic coaching and mentoring, and ensuring that we're going a little bit forward.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, I have a child that had an IEP from the age of about 12. We didn't do it too early because for various reasons. But I do feel like a bit of tutoring can sometimes help with the confidence aspect. So whether you call it academic coaching so it's a little bit of tutoring. Of course, tutoring is rampant in Hong Kong, and a lot of the time it's not necessary and it's stressing everybody out. I'm totally with you on that. But yeah, it's just got to be done for the right reasons in the right way, like everything.
You're a wise lady. I agree with your words completely, Ruth. Exactly how you put that. it does build confidence. You have a point. You have a point. So
We could talk and talk and talk, but I will let you go home because I know it's getting late. I think, look, most people will watch this on replay, and there's been some great content here, John. Thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. We need to get you back. Because there is so much. So you'll give us your contact information. We'll put the links. Could you let us have the link for the self-assessments? And if people want to get in touch with John, you're very happy to have a quick chat with parents. Yeah, and there's
certainly,
a booking.
if you ever want to, I do. If you ever just have a question about your IEP, just please just send me a message. My website will be there. I'm happy to even just look it over and have a conversation with you and how we can move forward and what accommodations are necessary, anything like that. Even a twice exceptional. We just picked up a differentiation and enrichment coordinator in our program, and they're working in my company, and they're working out of Singapore, working exactly in that differentiation and enrichment for students.
Hey, we need to open a school.
Hey.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for watching. If you watched live, this has been John Larkin from Elevate Educate. We've been talking about giving your child the gift of challenge. We also talked about, oh my gosh, what did we talk about? Universal screeners. We talked about universal design of learning, multiple tier support system. Go back and watch this and take notes. It has been really, really super interesting. I'll be off next week, and I think I'm back the week after, but otherwise usually Thursdays at 6 o'clock we go live, either just myself doing a normal Q&A, or sometimes like this evening we're lucky enough to have a special guest like John. So thank you, John. I'll say good night.
It was a pleasure, Ruth. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.